Where do I even start? Guess I'll try the beginning. Gaster's theme, also known as mus_st_him if you go by the game's files, is a short loop of music that can be heard in Undertale under very specific circumstances. First, more as a step 0 really, you'll want to be playing on patch 1.001 or later, because in the original release of the game, reaching Gaster's theme was impossible without save file editing. Second, your file's fun value, a random number between 1 and 100 generated each time you reset your save, must be exactly 65. Third, you need to walk north out of the save point room in Snowdin where boxes are introduced, the path that normally leads to a dead end by the riverbank. Finally, make one last 50-50 coin flip and congratulations, you've found the sound test. This weird, slightly scary menu lets you select and play such banger tracks as and. These songs are very cool in that they have no relevance to anything. The fourth and final track, though, is Gaster's theme. We know this because it's called Gaster's theme. It sounds like this, and once you start playing it, there's no way to stop. The other options don't work anymore. All you can do is mash your keyboard for 20 seconds until the music suddenly cuts out, and the game flashes you this message. And plops you back in Snowdin. Gee whiz, we said in 2016. I sure bet that isn't foreshadowing anything. Fast forward 7 years and oh boy! What's this? What's that? What are you doing? Do you have a permit for this? To cut a long story short, this obscure little piece of shit was now the most famous 4 notes after... Why did this happen? Well, you know why. And if you don't, this isn't the place to find out. There's about 1,000 other perfectly good videos going over Gaster's significance to Deltarune in mind-numbing, marrow-sucking detail at this point, so please just watch one of those. If you're a Deltarune lorehead who's made it to current year without getting up to speed on Gaster lore, then honestly I'm starting to think you're maybe just operating at a spite at this point. Regardless of how we got here, the fact remains that Deltarune fans have made quite a hobby out of sniffing out where Gaster's theme might be creeping its way into the game's score, and I'm right there with them. Toby's been using music as a vehicle for storytelling at least since Homestuck, and with Undertale and Deltarune, he's pushed the technique so hard that you'd have to be literally deaf to ignore it as an avenue for analysis, and even then, Beethoven could probably still pull it off. I have, however, seen many instances of what I believe is the fanbase getting a bit too caught up in the Gaster Gold Rush and pointing out quotes of his theme that just aren't really there. So for this video, I thought I'd finally wring some use out of my half-a-music degree and look into the matter myself. Hopefully by the time we're done, we can all learn a bit about arcane Deltarune lore and music theory. Sound good? Sounds good. Let's go. I've been over what Gaster's theme is, but not yet what it is. Musically, I mean. First off, it's the theme of Gaster. For the purposes of this discussion, a theme is basically a motif, and since Toby Fox is in the picture, you can bet your favorite ass cheek that motif is of the light variety. And I don't mean like the Pepsi. I'm talking about leitmotifs, a word that, as a Toby Fox fan, you've definitely heard tossed around, but might not know the exact meaning of. So, let's talk about it. First off, leitmotifs are motifs, but most motifs are not leitmotifs. At its most basic, a motif is just any recurring pattern in a piece of music that contributes to its identity. And by pattern here, I mean a pattern of notes, rhythms, specific instruments, anything really, just mostly notes. The music world's favorite example of this seems to be from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. This little 4-note flourish doesn't represent any particular person or concept, it's purely musical, and yet it's developed and iterated on as the symphony progresses in a remarkably narrative-feeling way. It's almost like the motif is the protagonist of an invisible story, going on adventures and undergoing character development in an abstract world that we can hear and imagine, but not see. Huh, interesting. Kinda makes you wonder what would happen if you took that abstract storytelling potential and made it concrete.
Enter Richard Wagner, born 1813. Beard, theater class. Hobbies, cuckoldry, fleeing countries, bassoon elongation, socialism, racism, queer baiting the king of Germany.
Wait, what? Yeah, he was kind of a weirdo. Anyway, Wagner was a dude who made operas. He wrote a lot of music, he wrote a lot of characters. One day, something occurred to him. Over the course of an opera, characters tend to go through arcs. Similarly, over the course of a piece of music, motifs tend to go through development. Two parallel media, two parallel evolving entities. So why not just stick them together? And thus the leitmotif was born. A fragment of music that represents a thing and a story, and undergoes musical changes to reflect any narrative changes that occur to that thing. Just like the characters they often represent, leitmotifs are a combination of consistent and variable elements. To claw my way back into the ballpark of the original topic, here's Sans. Here's Sans' theme. Here's Sans with osteoporosis. Here's Sans' theme but lounge jazz. Here's Sans dressed like an arcade carpet. Here's Sans' theme arranged like an arcade carpet, etc. Clearly, we have major changes between each of the examples here, but there's also a stable core of fundamentally Sansian features that lets us identify them all as representing the same character. Like a Stretch Armstrong doll, a leitmotif can be bent pretty far out of shape before becoming unrecognizable, but this malleability is also what makes the task of identifying leitmotifs so tricky, especially in the context of Gaster's theme. How much about a motif can be changed before you get a ship of Theseus that can no longer reasonably be called the same motif? Where do you draw the line? Welcome, everyone, to the Deltarune motif comparison apparatus 666 billion. The function of this device is, much like a prism, to refract a single motif into a rainbow of constituent features. Displayed in the central monitor is Gaster's theme, written in standard musical notation. Let's hear it. Yep, that's Gaster. If you don't read music, that's okay, because music notation is weird, arbitrary, and overall just a bit shit. It packs together simultaneous information about pitch, tonality, and rhythm, which can make different excerpts hard to compare at a glance. The radial modules of the DMCA 666 unpack this information. Let's start with rhythm. Here on the right we can see that Gaster's theme is played at a speed of 110 beats per minute. A beat here refers to the length of one of these notes, with no curly tail, also called quarter notes. Gaster's theme, however, is written in curly-tailed 8th notes, which last half a beat and are thus twice as fast. There's also 16th notes with 2 tails, which are twice as fast as 8th notes, and so on. The absolute duration of each note doesn't really matter though, since 4 8th notes played at 110 BPM is the same as 4 quarter notes played at 220 BPM. What matters here is that all 4 notes are the same length, meaning Gaster's theme has a steady rhythm with no variations. In other words, it's really boring, and not a very distinctive feature of the motif. Looking at how Toby uses other leitmotifs such as Heartache, Spear of Justice, Alfie's, etc., we can also see that rhythm is often the first thing to change when a motif gets remixed for a new context. So unfortunately, this module won't be the most useful for identifying Gaster quotes. It still looks cool though, so I'll keep it here for completeness. Next up, we have the interval module. Please accustom yourself to the sight of it. We'll be spending a lot of time here. So, first and foremost, an interval is the distance in pitch between 2 notes. To explain why they're so important, I'll ask a question. What's a song from the Deltarune soundtrack that starts on this note? Think about it, 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 and time's up. If your answer was Checker Dance, you're wrong, since the background music's been playing in the wrong key this whole time. If your answer instead was, I have no fucking clue, Andrew, this is impossible, you're on the right track, since most humans, even including trained musicians, are really, really bad at identifying pitch. But wait, how does that make sense? Isn't hearing pitches half the point of music? Well, yes, of course it is, but the pitch you're actually hearing in that case is relative pitch. That is, how different the pitch of each note is from the surrounding notes, or from a fixed reference point like the root note of a key. Standard music notation specifies the absolute pitch of each note, the kind you can't actually hear. The reason for this is that you need to know absolute pitches for stuff like playing the music on an instrument, but when you just want to analyze how the music sounds, dealing with note names like A, B flat, and F is kind of like comparing long jump records using geographical coordinates. Theoretically, the same information is there, but it obfuscates the part we actually care about, the distances. And so, what the interval module displays is simply the distance, or interval, between each note to the next in a given melody. The intervals are measured in semitones, which is the pitch difference between 2 adjacent keys on a piano, and are prefixed with either a plus or a minus sign depending on whether the interval goes upward or downward from the first note. In Gaster's theme, for example, we start on A and move up 1 semitone to B flat. We then jump up 7 semitones to F, back down 7 semitones to B flat again, and finally back down a semitone to A when the theme repeats. The beauty of describing a melody like this is that these intervals don't change when the theme later shifts down a semitone to start on A flat. In that sense, these four numbers, 1, 7, -7, -1, are the fundamental fingerprint of Gaster's motif, and given its simplicity in other areas, I believe this is by far the most important feature to look for when identifying it. There is, however, a catch. In a Toby Fox soundtrack, even a leitmotif's intervals are not immune to change. Just look at Your Best Friend versus Finale. Or Sands versus Raining Somewhere Else. When this happens though, it's usually in motifs with much longer and more complex melodies, meaning their intervallic fingerprints are hefty enough that they're still recognizable even if you ignore the size of the intervals and just look at whether the notes go up or down, what you'd call the melody's contour. The up-up-down-down contour of Gaster's theme, by contrast, is so incredibly basic that if we use it as our only standard of comparison, we can find Gaster's theme turning up in some very, surprising places. So yeah, we need the intervals. I mentioned a second ago that Gaster's theme's intervals don't change when it's transposed down a semitone. This was a subtle reference to the fact that after 4 repetitions, Gaster's theme transposes itself down a semitone. This is a distinctive enough feature of the theme that I gave it its own unit on the DMCA 666, the transposition module. This one's pretty simple. A transposition just means shifting every note of a melody up or down by a number of semitones. For melodies that are more firmly rooted in a key, this often requires tweaking some of the intervals, but Gaster's theme isn't quite tonal enough to care about subtleties like that, and just shunts every note down uniformly. Speaking of which, we have the tonality module. This thing should probably just be called the key module, but that looked really bad in this font, so I went with a slightly fancier term. I'll be upfront here, this thing is not useful for analyzing the leitmotif. It is, however, an excuse to talk about more music theory. And so I will. Musical key is a bit of a weird concept, since it's really 2 different bits of information glued together, a piece's tonic note and its mode. Take the key C major for example. C is the tonic, meaning the root note the key's built on top of, and major is the mode, which is basically just a list of, intervals that you follow from the tonic to see what other notes get included in that key. The interval pattern for the major mode is 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1, but there's also minor, Dorian, Lydian, Mixolydian, blues, and many more. It's pretty easy to hear what mode a piece of music is in, but for all the same reasons I discussed in the interval module, it's almost impossible to tell by ear what the tonic is. Surprisingly though, this actually wasn't always the case. Back in the good old days, Western classical music was played using a different tuning system called just intonation. Describing exactly how it was different is a little complex, but basically it had the effect that moving a key to a different tonic actually created tiny changes in the spacing between the notes, giving each key its own subtly unique sound. In modern times though, we instead use this hack job system called equal temperament that irons these variations out and relegates the role of the tonic note to a sort of dippy sonic zodiac sign, at least from the listener's point of view. Oh right, we were talking about Gaster. Thing is, Gaster's theme doesn't really have a key, or if it does, it's impossible to pin down exactly which. The uniform downward modulation creates a set of notes that don't fit nicely into any common mode as far as I'm aware, and it's more likely that Gaster's theme just wasn't written with a definite key in mind. I'll throw the keys of other tracks we discuss up here anyway though, because it's fun trivia. Last but not least, we have the miscellaneous module. It's basically a big amorphous sack that hoovers up info too nebulous or contextual to give dedicated displays. Unfortunately, because Gaster's theme is so minimal, there's not a whole lot left to discuss about it besides the fact that it's quite repetitive. Ideally, I'd be able to dig further into the gory details of how the theme was produced, the instruments and effects and whatnot, but unfortunately I'm much more qualified to analyze music theory than digital music production, and so we'll just have to move on for now. This really is an unfortunate gap in my skill set, and if there was anything at all that I could do to eliminate it.
So, Gaster's theme. Not too difficult to recreate, but should be interesting nonetheless. Very, very interesting. In FL Studio, Toby's DAW of choice, we can load up the Chrono Trigger sound font. Selecting the piano, I'll turn up the release of the notes, giving them a sustained effect. A lot of people don't know this, but Gaster's theme actually has a left-hand part. Let's do the main melody. Fun fact, this is the same piano used in another hymn, which I'm sure Andrew will have more than a few words to say about.
Do you hear the leitmotif? Do you hear it?
For the post-processing, the main effects we hear are a delay, some EQ tempering to give it a sort of radio telephone effect, and reverb to give it some space. And that's it for Gaster's theme. Take it away, Andrew.
Ah, a rabbit creature did it for me. Nice. Hold up 1 second though, if Gaster's theme does actually have a bass line, the added harmonic information might give us just enough evidence to actually assign it a key. As it turns out, it's kind of in D minor. Huh. Well, that's neat. Ever wondered what Gaster's theme in a major key sounds like? No? Well, too bad, apparently it's this. I'm not sure if this changes anything, but I'll leave it down here in case it's useful. It won't be though. Alright, I've kept you waiting long enough. Let's analyze some Gaster sightings. The way this is going to work is that I'll keep the data from Gaster's theme itself on the diagram in these green colored sections for reference, and display the data from each prospective quote with yellow color coding. If that gets confusing, just remember, green for Gaster and yellow for
Yo dog, I think I just heard a leitmotif.
Some candidate excerpts will be longer than 4 notes, but that's okay since the actual Gastery part can, by definition, only take up about 4 notes at a time, and that's what I'll be focusing on. Also, for visual clarity, all the music notation will be shifted into the octave that puts it closest to Gaster's theme in the treble clef. As for where the candidate Gaster references are coming from in the first place, the examples I've gathered are a combination of my own investigation into the soundtrack, basically just going through each piece sequentially while listening really hard, and this 2019 video from Media Motifs that attempts to catalog every occurrence of Gaster's theme in Chapter 1. Now, across all my previous videos, I've avoided directly commenting on the work of other channels. The reason for this is twofold. 1, my scripts can come off as kinda snarky and I don't want to start a flame war over nothing, and 2, I can think of better uses of time than setting out to individually counter every Deltarune theory I disagree with, such as reading Higurashi or jumping into a volcano. This time though, it's a bit different. Based on pretty much every conversation I've had involving the combination of Gaster's theme and Deltarune, this one Media Motifs video seems to be the touchstone for the fandom's collective knowledge on the topic. A quick YouTube search confirms this. Not only does Media Motifs seem to be the only sizable channel filling this niche, their Gaster video also has a Christopher Moon comment, which is the only true marker of success within this industry. The problem here is that, by the creator's own admission, this video was never intended to be taken that seriously, and unsurprisingly, following that disclaimer, it contains a lot of sketchy information. Unfortunately, and yet predictably, the video's self-awareness of its own limitations hasn't stopped a large number of people from consuming its contents uncritically and proceeding to parrot its findings ad nauseum in Discord chats worldwide. All that is to say, I bear Media Motifs no ill will, but this topic is long overdue for a second opinion. Now, let's get into it. Oh, well, that was easy. So, I've got good news and bad news. Good news is that in precisely 1 try, looking at the very first song in the Deltarune soundtrack, we've been handed a specimen of Gaster's theme fit for display in the fucking Smithsonian. It's so convenient, it's almost like someone, I don't know, planned it to be the first thing you'd hear after starting the game. The bad news is that this is the last time Toby's gonna hand us a win remotely this free. Getting into the details, you can see that not really much has even been changed. The intervals are perfect, as is the note order. It repeats very similarly to the original, except for the doubled first note, and even modulates downward, albeit by a whole tone instead of a semitone. As if this wasn't already enough, the melody's even played on the exact same Chrono Trigger piano as the original theme. In the face of all those similarities, and the fact that it's literally the only melodic content in the whole track, the tweaked rhythm barely makes a dent. It's super duper just Gaster's theme. We're off to a strong start here. While not as brain-dead obvious as another hymn, the Gaster quote here is pretty solid. It's one thing to stuff a motif down in a musty, half-audible bass line, but here the Gastery bit arrives right at the entrance of a very exposed melodic phrase, front and center. The trick with this melody is that it's 2 weak quotes of Gaster's theme on either side of one perfect quote. I'll call them A, B, and C respectively. In A, the top note only goes up 4 semitones instead of 7, and in C, the 4th note only drops down a semitone before transitioning into a mostly unrelated conclusion. In isolation, these would both be very poor matches, but once we throw in B, an intervallically perfect Gaster quote, it recontextualizes both A and C as variants of itself, A having been tweaked to work as a Scarlet Foresty lead-up to the full motif, and C being tweaked to wind the motif down to a Scarlet Foresty conclusion that has no equivalent in Gaster's original, endlessly looping theme. At risk of oversimplifying, this is kinda just how melodies are made. You take a simple motif, make a few tweaked versions, copy-paste them around a bit to add length, and plug the gaps with unique material to keep things fresh. And in this case, I think there's a decent argument that the underlying idea this melody was constructed from was Gaster's theme. As for why it appears in the background music of the Scarlet Forest, I'm less sure. We'll just have to see if it's the start of a pattern. By the way, if anyone's interested in learning more about this process of elaborating motifs into melodies, 8-Bit Music Theory has a banger video about Gwyn's theme that covers it. I'd recommend checking it out. Okay, before even looking at the music, this track comes with about 50 pounds of baggage we need to unpack. First off, it's not originally from Deltarune. Toby first released it in 2012 under the title Waltz of Secom Masada as part of a short Yumi Nikki tribute album. Now, I'm no Yumi Nikkiologist, but according to the game's wiki, Secom Masada is this guy, an NPC you encounter in front of a huge keyboard in a spaceship. He looks kinda like the Mystery Man sprite, I guess, but not as much as Uboa, who's also a Yumi Nikki character. Second piece of baggage is that this song plays in the hidden egg rooms, which I know a lot of people already associate with Gaster. The reasoning behind this is
actually surprisingly simple.
Just kidding, it's not simple at all, but people do seem to like the Sieve gaming bits, so...
The secret rooms in Deltarune contain a man behind a tree who gives you an egg. In the True Labs from Undertale, there's a fog-filled room where Frisk can interact with invisible objects described as feeling like a man, and like a tree ripe with fruit. After clearing the fog, both objects are revealed to be refrigerators. One of the few places you can put eggs in the secret rooms is a refrigerator in Nazgor's house. The original occupant of the True Labs was Gaster, therefore...
Gaster confirmed.
Okay, enough. Music now. Despite occurring at the beginning of an exposed melody, the Gaster quote here is quite sketchy. Really, it's just the first 3 notes, and even then, the order of the first 2 is swapped. What saves it somewhat, though, is that this melody actually repeats, modulated down a whole tone, just like another hymn. It's not exactly the semitone modulation from the original, but the effect is almost the same, and it still adds a lot of credibility to the potential Gaster connection. Of course, this track including a deliberate Gaster reference would have some capital I implications about how long ago Gaster's theme was conceived, since Waltz of Secom Masada dates back to 2012, but to keep the video focused, let's just ignore that for now. Alright, here's the part where you learn why I spent so much time going on about intervals. The purported Gaster quote in Card Castle is, unlike previous examples, in the bass line. That's not a huge deal, Beethoven hides motifs in the bass, so Toby can too. What is a huge deal though, is that this pattern isn't Gaster's theme. As discussed, Gaster's motif is characterized by a semitone on the bottom and 7 semitones on top. The Card Castle bass line is 7 semitones on the bottom and 2 semitones on top, outlining what I think is just a G minor 7 chord. Not only are these intervals different, it's not even a case of just shifting one note. As far as I can tell, the simplest way to turn Gaster's theme into this bass line would be to move the bottom note a semitone lower and then flip the entire thing upside down. But safe to say, that's not actually the thought process people are going through when they hear Gaster's theme here. In terms of audible similarity, it's really just the contour. Up, up, down, down. Widening the net that far puts us back in the Hell dimension where Adele and Chopin have referenced Gaster, so I'm not a big fan of this one. Oh boy. If you thought Rouxls Kaard was bad at designing puzzles, just wait till you see him try to reference Gaster's theme. This shit is literally the first 3 notes of a minor scale played as a harpsichord ostinato. In terms of motivic content, it's much closer to referencing Meet the Spy than W.D. Gaster. Hey kids, ever wondered what the musical equivalent of that Peter Griffin anime girl illusion would look like? No? Huh, no way, me neither. Thankfully though, that doesn't matter, because whether he meant to or not, Toby Fox has already made it. April 2012 has repeated rising and falling arpeggios, almost the same bass line from Card Castle that everyone thought was Gaster's theme, constant whole tone and semitone modulations, and a constantly shifting melody played by weird enharmonic instruments that obscure the exact notes and push you to focus on the contour instead of the intervals. It is a CIA-grade Gaster hallucination machine. April 2012 does not have Gaster's theme. Oh, wait, never mind. It does. Just only for one moment in the last quarter of the track, after gaslighting you for 15 seconds. Very cool, Toby. Thanks for that. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's the same bass line from Card Castle being played on electric guitar. Well, saves me time at least. In the original Media Motifs breakdown of this track, they indicated 2 potential quotes of Gaster's theme in different places. The latter example, in the left hand of the piano, is quite a stretch. It's just 4 notes cherry-picked from a 6-note arpeggiated chord with the wrong intervals, and, unusually even for sketchy quotes of Gaster's theme, 4 unique notes instead of 3. I'd say in terms of objective similarity that the left-hand piano part of Fallen Down is actually a better Gaster quote than this, but that's kind of like saying your Starbucks venti cup is more likely to be the Holy Grail than a Bourbon Street hand grenade. The first example, on the other hand, kinda sounds like Gaster's theme. It's nearly an exact quote, except that the 4th note drops down 8 semitones instead of 7 and prematurely returns to the pitch of the starting note. Another point of similarity is that the pattern repeats after a downward modulation, this time by 4 semitones instead of 1, but you know the drill by now, the effect is still similar. What really sells it for me though is that by referencing this motif, the melody is forced to emphasize the 7th scale degree on the first note. Unfortunately, to explain exactly what I mean by that, we'd have to go down a very deep rabbit hole about chord tones versus non-chord tones that would culminate in me basically summarizing the entire concept of functional harmony, which would be fun, but it would also take a very long time. So instead, I'll just say that this note occurring both at the beginning of a melody and on the first beat of a bar means that it's heavily accented, and as such, you generally expect it to be a stable tone, like, I don't know, the tonic or something. Instead though, the melody proudly plonks out a scale degree 7, which is just about the most unstable note you can get without leaving the key entirely. Overall, this isn't that weird of a move, musically speaking, and there's certainly plenty of reasons to do it besides quoting Gaster's theme, but it's at very least striking. It calls attention to itself, and gives the impression that the melody is highlighting the slightly dissonant sound of Gaster's theme rather than trying to pretty it up and make it less conspicuous. All said, it's not the craziest revelation to find a Gaster reference in a song literally named after darkness, but it's still nice to know there's more at work here than pure confirmation bias. The second half of this track features a very prominent Gaster-adjacent pattern in the bass line, but once again, under close inspection, the intervals fail us. The closest it ever gets is this first arpeggio, which is composed of 2 semitones on the bottom and 5 semitones on top, meaning both intervals are slightly wrong. Still, the sheer emphasis the bassline puts on this pattern means we can at least grasp at straws by saying it's a loose variant of the motif that was reinterpreted to fit the track's more upbeat mood. With every Media Motifs Gaster sighting so far, I've been able to at least break down my reasoning for why I did or did not think it resembled Gaster's theme, but in this case I'm sincerely not sure what I'm even supposed to be hearing. The melody here sounds a tiny bit like Toby's old Homestuck track, Penumbra Phantasm, which, well, is not Gaster's theme, and the specific part highlighted in the video is just 4 descending notes, which is obviously absurd. At the very end though, we do at least get a partial match for the first 3 notes of Gaster's theme, so I assume Media Motifs meant to highlight this and just made a mistake at some point. In any case, even if this quote isn't purely hallucinatory like I first thought, it's still not much to get excited about. This is a bit awkward. While there is Gastery material in this piece, it turns out to just be quoted from its much meatier older brother in the soundtrack, The World Revolving, which is next on the docket anyway. So, to avoid repeating myself, I'll defer the analysis until then. First though, it's been a while since I've done a video this long, and it's my qualified opinion as someone who once took a psychology course in first year university, that all the iPad babies in my audience are in dire need of a brain break. And you know what that means. Psych. We don't need a break. We need to talk. I realize my vibe can come off as kind of aloof, but I've been in this game for a year now, and I'm wise to word on the street. I've heard what people say. Andrew's videos are good, but his theories are always so safe. He's too afraid of being proven wrong to ever go out on a limb and table anything really interesting. If I wanted to know that Toby Fox wrote Deltarune's narration, I would read Wikipedia. Yeah. Anyway, I get it, I'm not mad. I only brought this up because I want you to keep one thing in mind. Everything that's about to happen next, you asked for it. You heard right. Get your great Ananzis and Shara X's out of here. That's baby shit. Papa Fox is home now and he's brought his own mega epic Gaster fan song. Think I'm joking? Well, the answer is yes, but only for the passive-aggressive rant a minute ago. I do genuinely believe, as I have for years now, that Gaster's theme is the core motivic component that the world Revolving was built from. Or to be precise, it's what the so-called freedom theme that comprises the song's middle section was built from. Let's give it a listen. That's a much longer excerpt than we've seen so far, but just look at the beginning for now. I mean literally, just look at it. The notation isn't lying here. Every single note on the right matches one from Gaster's theme, just a semitone higher. Frustratingly, I can't say that this is a 100% perfect quote. If we look at the 4 notes in the middle, the interval module shows a clear discrepancy. However, in this case, just looking at the intervals actually exaggerates how much has been changed. The notes themselves are all still from Gaster's theme, it's just that the order of the last 2 have been swapped so the melody can end on the more stable tonic note. Or alternatively, if we just fill in the suspicious pause created by this one elongated note... Huh, would you look at that? Onto the second pattern. At a glance it looks pretty different, but the trick is that this F-sharp bottom note here is actually the same thing as the F-sharp top note of the first pattern, just 1 octave lower. If we shift it back up, suddenly it's clear that this pattern is just a rehash of the first one with a single note change to create a more fluid walk down to the F-sharp. After that, we get one more direct quote of the first pattern, and then it trails off into a more free-form conclusion. What I want to stress here is that this is the Freedom theme, or Superboss theme, or whatever you want to call it. It's the same melody that reappears in Big Shot later on, and it clearly holds a lot of significance within the game's leitmotivic ecosystem. It's a melody filling a very unique role that would obviously face a ton of scrutiny by the fanbase, and that you'd think would provide Toby a golden opportunity to inject some totally new ideas into the soundtrack. And yet, from what we've seen here, most of its musical identity is ripped straight out of Gaster's theme. This, more than any prior example, makes me suspect an overriding motivation. We're not even done though. The shared part of the Freedom motif ends there, but Jevel's version decides to stick around for a bit and basically pop the fuck off. Wait a minute. Play that again. Wow, yep, that is just 4 copies of Gaster's theme in a trench coat. The top note goes up each time, sure, but that doesn't mean there's 4 different musical ideas here. It's really just one idea, Gaster's theme, that's been repeated with a predictable modification each time to turn the top notes into an ascending melody. And again, the following material simply arises from extrapolating that one pattern. Its contour is echoed again here, 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 and here, just with the notes changed to fit whatever the current chord is. The sum of all these factors is that I not only believe the Freedom theme references Gaster's theme, but that it very well could have been the result of Toby Fox sitting down at his piano and explicitly deciding to arrange Gaster's motif into a raucous boss track. It doesn't have to have been made that way, of course, but it is a hunch of mine, let's call it a theory, that this was the intent, and that the answer to the age-old question of
What music if Gaster was boss?
lies not in the countless fan-made interpretations, but was secretly under our noses the whole time. Toby, you sly dog.
Welcome, honored guest.
To Chapter 2. As of the time of writing, there is no Media Motifs video for Gaster's theme in the Chapter 2 soundtrack, meaning we're officially in uncharted waters. As a result, expect to see fewer candidates, because I can't analyze what I don't notice in the first place, and I'm not brave enough to take the Jaru approach and pull my entire viewer base for every 4-note melody in the soundtrack that one of them happened to hallucinate Gaster's theme in once after 40 hours of sleep deprivation. To start us off, we have something that actually kind of surprised me. Noelle's theme, or specifically what seems to be its default version, Girl Next Door. It's a track that I'd honestly slept on until starting this project, partially because it only plays for one lighthearted scene at the beginning of the chapter, and partially because it's quickly overshadowed by its gloomier, more suggestively titled remix, Lost Girl. As it turns out though, listen for a few moments with the right mindset, and boom, that's a Gaster. Blatantly Gaster. It's in the bass, sure, but that bass line is the first new part to enter the song, and nothing else comes in with it, making it very prominent. On top of that, this isn't a case of some Gastery notes being tossed into an ongoing melody. This bass line comes out the gate with a statement of Gaster's motif, and the motif is echoed in the first few notes of each new phrase that plays after it. The icing on the cake is that this melody pulls the same starting on an accented scale degree 7 trick that Darkness Falls does, just actually on scale degree 7 this time and not 2. One might even say, come to think of it, that I originally planned to have the explanation of unstable accented notes here, but then copy-pasted that section of script into Darkness Falls without updating the scale degree number. Oopsie doopsie. Moving on now to our next—
But wait, there's more!
This is not a drill, folks. That wasn't the only Gaster reference in this song. At 38 seconds in, the Lost Girl theme enters on some sort of glockenspiel with a whammy bar. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Point is, the melody of Lost Girl actually contains its own Gastery bit. Technically it's a quote from the Freedom motif, but it's the Gastery bit of the Freedom motif, so fuck, I guess Gaster's theme follows the transitive property now, why not? Anyway, in Lost Girl proper, this quote is quite brief, but during its appearance in Girl Next Door, this happens. It's extended into a repeating pattern that fills 2 full bars. Hearing one reference to Gaster's theme in a song can feel like you're being winked at. This feels like a taunt. So anyway, Queen's theme. Ah, yep, there it is, right at the beginning. It's actually identical to the first 8 notes of the Gastery bit in Scarlet Forest that I already talked about, just transposed to a minor key, so a few of my thoughts on that should carry over. But with the pattern cut so short, most of the structural arguments I made in favor of the Scarlet Forest quote no longer apply, and so this one's a lot easier to brush off as coincidence. Speaking of Scarlet Forest, remember when I said it was weird that Gaster's motif would be showing up in a random area theme, and that we'd have to see if it was the start of some sort of pattern? Well, I'm happy to report that the answer to that question is yes, but actually no. You see, my one hunch for why that motif would be tied to the Scarlet Forest was that it alone of all the Chapter 1 zones contained the secret egg room, which, as discussed, carries at least a faint odor of WD Gaster. To keep that hypothesis alive, what you'd hope to see in future chapters is a Gaster quote in the background music of whatever area contained that chapter's egg room, since it would be a valuable piece of evidence linking the Eggman to good old Mystery Man without having to run the conspiracy corkboard hell gauntlet from before. The good news is that Gaster's motif is, indeed, referenced in Welcome to the City, the music for the Cyber City area that contains Chapter 2's egg room. The bad news is that the part of Welcome to the City containing the motif is just a remix of the Cyber Field music, which obviously then also has the reference despite not having an egg room, and the hypothesis implodes. Oh shit, I didn't talk about the music at all. Okay, basically this melody is similar to the World Revolving, and then it opens with this one lightly modified Gaster quote, and then proceeds to mash Ctrl-V and use echoes of that pattern to fill up basically every subsequent bar. The pattern itself isn't quite as solid of a match as in the World Revolving, but it gets an equally huge amount of emphasis, and so still makes for a reasonably convincing reference. I literally just talked about this. This is Queen's theme again. This is Queen's theme again. Again. Keep the bangers coming, Toby. Ah shit, he actually did keep the bangers coming. Who could have possibly foreseen this? I, for one, am gobsmacked. Okay, if you think this is redundant, just be grateful I couldn't detect any Gaster residue in the Sweet Cap'n Cakes' theme. We'd be here until the next Down the Rabbit Hole upload. This is the last one, I promise.
Hey, Abri, it's
Big Shot, #1 rated leitmotivic Petri Dish 2021. If you know anything about this track, it's that it's a mashup of no fewer than 5 different themes, to the extent that it could pass as the soundtrack to a fucking Homestuck Flash. Fortunately for this video's runtime though, Big Shot's intersection with Gaster's theme is entirely contained within its reprise of the Freedom theme that I already ranted about for 2 hours in the World Revolving segment, so there's nothing new to actually say here. As weirdly popular as this track seems to be with the fanbase, it's really just a note-for-note reprise of the World Revolving. Strictly speaking, it's not the same part that I covered in the previous World Revolving segment, but it still quotes the main Freedom theme pattern, and as such, inherits most of that song's Gasteriness. I wish we had a bang to end on here, but regrettably the soundtrack declined to provide one. What it did provide were a couple extra malformed Gaster arpeggios in the Snowgrave exclusive track, Flashback. The top interval here spans 4 semitones instead of 7, but the bottom is still a proper semitone, meaning it's at least arguably closer to Gaster's motif than the similar pattern from Friendship. Also, like in Friendship, the sheer stubbornness with which the song repeats this pattern is the main thing lending it credibility as a Gaster reference, though in this case the resemblance is furthered by a downward modulation. For a quote that's missing the key 7 semitone leap, this is about as convincing as I think we're gonna get. So, if you're anything like me, and I hope you are because that's the easiest demographic to target, you're currently thinking something along these lines. Golly gee, Andrew, those sure were just 24 consecutive Gaster's theme sightings you analyzed from the Deltarune soundtrack. It was actually really exhausting and took a long time. What do I do with this information? And to that, I would answer, well, that's kinda your problem now, bucko. Just like with the narrator video, the data is the point of this exercise, not so much the conclusion. With that said, a 2-axis diagram probably couldn't hurt. Nice diagram, huh? Well, actually no, it's kinda shit. The DMCA 666 soaked up a lot of the funding. It'll do though. Here's what you're looking at. On the x-axis, ascending from left to right, is the likelihood of each candidate Gaster reference actually being a Gaster reference, in my estimation of course. It's just the inverse of the made-up brain rot index that I spent the whole time assigning to the candidates. On the y-axis, ascending in the usual sense, is how much the context in which each candidate track plays primes you to assume Gaster's involvement. In other words, it ranks how much you'd expect a given track to contain a Gaster reference, with the obviously Gastery stuff like another hymn floating to the top, and completely innocuous tracks like, I don't know, Friendship sinking to the bottom. With the axes arranged like so, we can divide the results by quadrant into 4 conceptual categories. In the bottom left, we have what I'll call the null candidates. Songs that shouldn't contain Gaster's theme, and don't. Not much else to say here. Sorry Rouxls Kaard Night Truthers, it's nothing personal, I just don't think your ideas make any sense or have merit. Up in the top right quadrant, by contrast, we have the trivial positives. These are the Nongshim kimchi-flavored instant noodles of Gaster quotes. They're delicious in the moment, and knowing that you have a healthy stockpile of them in the pantry bolsters your will to live in the wee hours of the morning, but at the end of the day, they're still empty calories. They probably do reference Gaster's theme, but you don't actually gain any new information by noticing that. Boy howdy, another hymn sure sounds a lot like Gaster's theme. No shit, Sherlock, it's in the title. Zoink, Scoob, have you noticed that all the Superboss themes imply that Spamton and Jevil might have been influenced by Gaster? Mondo cool, Shaggy. I read the textual evidence for the same thing on the wiki 6 fucking months ago. Moving on the top left we have a more interesting class of candidates that I totally would have thought of a really cool and academic sounding name for if it contained more than one single song. The Holy, judging by the context in which it plays, is something like a theme for the Dark Fountains. Dark fountains are dark, darkness, darker yet darker, Gaster. It all lines up. One problem though, the Gaster reference in this track is hot garbage. I would say it's not there at all in fact. This is mildly surprising, but also not particularly meaningful, so I'm just going to ignore it. Finally, skedoodling over to the bottom left, we have the good shit. high entropy Gaster references, ones that aren't expected and can potentially be used to predict future story events. I'll discuss these in more detail. First, we've got Man, aka Waltz of Sekon Masada. The quote here isn't the best, but it just barely clears the bar to lending one more shred of credibility to the Eggman being somehow related to Gaster. It's still very ambiguous though, I wouldn't put too much stock in it myself. Next up is Queen's theme. I'm not sure what to do with this one. Relative to how big of a reveal it would be that the chapter antagonists are associated with Gaster in addition to the secret bosses, this quote's just not solid enough to bear that weight, especially when the equivalent quote in King's theme is exponentially worse. For April 2012, I don't know man. Even if Toby Fox crawled out from under my bed and handed me a ratified document professing that the quote here was 100% intentional, what would that really tell us beyond the fact that Gaster's theme has existed since at least 11 years ago? It would be interesting, sure, but not particularly insightful. Next up we have the 3 area themes, Scarlet Forest, A Cyber's World, and Welcome to the City. I've already detailed most of my thoughts on why this trio of candidates is so mysterious. The combination of Scarlet Forest and Cyber City once again suggests some relationship between Gaster and the Egg Rooms, but then a Cyber's World bombs in like the third wheel and blows that pattern out of the water. Maybe it is supposed to be meaningful, but the Cyberfield music was hastily copied from the Cyber City because of time crunch? That doesn't sound very likely to me, but the strength of these quotes demands some sort of explanation, and working with the information we have now, I don't know what else to give. This might just be a case of wait for Chapter 3. Last but not least are 2 very different tracks with one thing in common, Noel Holiday. These are curious. I want to say they're the only candidates that truly caught me off guard during this analysis, but after giving it some more thought, I'm not sure how surprised I should actually be. Looking into Noel's connections with Gaster is sort of like when you learn a new word and suddenly start hearing it everywhere, which I guess makes it a bit like Gaster's theme itself. A lot of it comes from the Spamton sweepstakes, the story of the mysterious egg that appeared in her video game as a child, accessed by clicking a picture of the tree from the secret rooms, the maze level in Dragon Blazers only she could solve, and how it led her upward to a locked door unlike anything else in the game. Maybe neither of these events has any direct relevance to Gaster, but what they do tell us is that Noel, voluntarily or not, has a knack for breaking games, for finding glitches and uprooting obscure secrets. Normally a pretty benign talent, unless, like Noel, you happen to live in a game as well as play them. And so we come to the weird route, a literal creepypasta-style breakdown of Deltarune's plot, achieved through a series of surreal and seemingly nonsensical actions that are hinted at nowhere and are only possible through Noel's presence. Despite being a deliberate addition to the game, everything about the weird route is designed to feel unintended, to simulate the experience of breaking through the game's bounds into something no one was ever meant to see. I could continue to wax poetic, but I think by now the parallels with Undertale's fun events should be pretty obvious. Noel is a video game character who's blessed, or cursed, with finding secrets in video games. Gaster is a video game character cursed, or blessed, to be the secret. And that's without even getting into the unused Java cookie item that would have caused Noel to see unreadable symbols when consumed, or opening up the whole can of worms that is Des, the lost girl who may or may not be the one crying out for help in these blocks of unused code that were clearly written expressly as bait for data miners. Sure, the voice in the code might not be her, and even if it is, who knows what specific circumstances it would imply, but you have to admit that it would be pretty fitting if Noel's search for her missing sister and her fascination with prying Easter eggs out of the dark corners of video games were, in the end, one and the same. So, how's that for a conclusion to the Gaster music theory video? Bet you didn't see an impromptu Noel analysis coming. I sure didn't. But sometimes that's just how the Lancer cookie crumbles. You sit down to analyze Gaster quotes for 30 minutes, and all that's left to say at the end is, Mayor Holiday, I'm afraid your daughter has Gaster's leitmotif as the first melodic content in her theme song. You might want to get that looked at. Or, I don't know, just make popcorn for when she activates Goner mode in Chapter 6 and guides the party to the Gaster dimension. Up to you. I don't know what she's going to do or when she's going to do it, but Noel is going to do something cool, and it will be related to Gaster. That's my theory. Quote me on it. As for more standard outro-y stuff, first and foremost I want to give a big shout out to ToffeeBun for offering to help out with this project. I'm a big fan of their work, and not only are they responsible for that minute-long segment you probably noticed, but also the transposed version of Checker Dance and the quote-unquote major key Gaster's theme. They're currently best known for their video about the production techniques behind the Undertale soundtrack, which I'll link below, but I hear they also have something new coming up, so maybe you should, I don't know, subscribe or something? And you know what, while you're at it, check out Vivat Veritas. Completely apropos of nothing, I just like their Deltarune takes and wish they had more views. Regular viewers at this point may find themselves asking, will there be a comment response stream? The answer, regular viewers, is yes. On Saturday the 24th at noon Pacific time, I'll be live streaming myself responding to as many of the comments as possible. First come, first served, so get them in early if you want yours read. In terms of the imminent direction of this channel, as many people probably know, I'm now deep into the process of publishing an indie game by the name of Random Access Mayhem. It's a roguelike top-down shooter type thing. You can check out my devlog if you're into that. Anyway, I won't mince words. That's going to be my life for the next few months. We plan to get a free demo out this summer, and the next video you'll see from me will almost definitely be a devlog. This doesn't mean the channel's never going back to Deltarune stuff, especially if Toby decides to, you know, drop Chapter 3 at some point. Come on, buddy, I'm starving down here. But if people are going to be giving me money on Patreon, they need to know what I'm doing with my time. Speaking of which, if you give me money on Patreon, you'll get your name made into a credit sequence like this in my next video, as well as other fancy perks like a different colored name on my Discord server, you know, the good stuff. Anyway, this video really needs to end at this point, so as always, I'll see you next time. And remember, Assy Pants OTP.